The Toronto Raptors are on the market for a new head coach. Is that new head coach going to be Coach Budenholzer? We will see. But regardless of who coaches this team next year, it is pretty hard, if not impossible, to imagine that that coach is going to be able to do much unless the Raptors drastically upgrade this roster. Now, a lot of the talk around upgrading the Toronto Raptors roster this offseason has included getting younger, getting older, getting more talented, getting more shooters, getting better defenders, replacing this guy and that guy. I'm going to point to something that not a lot of people are talking about, which is how about getting smarter? I think the Toronto Raptors need to get a lot smarter. And this is not something that should be overly unfamiliar to this franchise or to this fan base because the Raptors have done this 4 times before. So what I want to do today is I want to look at 4 examples from Raptor history in which the Toronto Raptors under various regimes, starting with Glenn Grunwald, Rob Babcock, Brian Colangelo, and yes, Masai Ujiri, have opted to trade in talent, athleticism, upside for experience and basketball IQ, and how that has resulted in massive shifts and turnarounds and Coaches of the Year awards for the coaches in place. Coach of the Year is not a real award. It's really difficult to discern how a coach is doing when they don't have the roster. Typically, what the Coach of the Year award should mean, and did mean when Sam Mitchell won it, when Dwayne Casey won it, and when Nick Nurse won it, was that analysts and media types have drastically underrated this roster relative to the pieces that exist, and they believe that the magic potion was the coach. So we underrated all your players. You managed to win 50 games without a so-called superstar, and so here's your Coach of the Year. That's Coach of the Year in a nutshell for you. So whether Coach Budenholzer was winning it, whether Nick Nurse or Dwayne Casey or whoever won it, at whatever point, trust me, all it really meant was the sum and the parts, the equation was wrong. So first I want to let Ime Udoka from 7 years ago explain the value of the Spurs system and how they use smart players to really bridge the gap between newness to a system. Because let's be honest, the Raptors cannot afford to be bad next year. They don't have a pick the next year. We cannot hammer that home enough. So if you are managing to bring in new pieces, especially new pieces that must be implemented, new pieces that are unfamiliar to your system, there is no system. There's a new coach. So in order to facilitate that speed, you need to get smart players. So let's hear Ime Udoka talk about it.
You've had a lot of guys join the team, sort of before the season starts and fit right into your offense, which doesn't seem to be that easy to learn, but they seem to pick it up right away. Is there anything you can give us, any insight into how you teach your offense that makes it easy enough for guys to jump on the team and do so well with it?
Well, we do a lot of motion offense where it's a lot of reads, so that's just a natural thing that, we go after players with high IQs so they know how to play the game, and it's a lot of reads. We have tons of set plays, of course, but we have guys that have been around for 15 years, so some of that stuff is second nature to them. We just really try to incorporate the new guys little by little. Pop really breaks it down as far as fundamentals throughout training camp, so we really break it down to the basics and build up from there. So he's not giving them too much to start with, even though we have an extensive playbook. He really breaks it down, strips it down to the fundamentals, and builds it up by play from there.
So when you say it that way, do you mean like part method, like 2-line drills and just go over it small?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like an 8th grade gym, if us in training camp. Footwork, pivots, passing, ball handling, multiple guys doing multiple things because we like our bigs to be able to pass, our guards to be able to, set picks and guard pick and roll. So we were doing a little bit of everything with everybody.
We broke down how LaMarcus Aldridge is going to fit into your offense. And let's just say we were pretty excited about it because it looks like it's going to be some really good stuff. Are you guys excited at all, or are you guys kind of ho-hum about him joining your team?
No, of course we're excited. He was one of the top free agents out there. We all know him very well. I played with him his rookie year in Portland, so I know him well.
All right, enough of Ime Udoka. We're still very sad that he ended up choosing the Houston Rockets. But that is a very young Ime Udoka talking about reads and reactions. You are limited to some extent to the roster that you have as a head coach. And too often, it's going to limit the way you can play defense. If you have a drop big, you can't switch everything. You have to accommodate that. good coaches learn how to work with the roster that they have. A good example, and has become a bit of a talking point on this channel, is what the Denver Nuggets are doing with Mike Malone. How are they managing to hide this so-called defensive disaster named Nikola Jokic, former MVP? How are they able to hide him? He's not a great defender at the rim. He's not necessarily the most switchable guy, but they have a scheme, and he's very smart, so he can pick it up very quickly. So intelligence is not an issue with that team for the most part. They also have a player who didn't have necessarily a reputation of being the smartest type of player, which is Aaron Gordon. How are they able to simplify that system for him and put him next to a player that can really unlock him completely? Too often, I feel like we subscribe to the theory that you can't teach height, just like you can't teach vert, you can't teach wingspan, right? And so there's this idea that you can take these very raw basketball players who don't have a necessarily like a great rhythm and feel for the for the game. They don't have the most intuitive knowledge of plays and sets. They're not necessarily great at breaking down their own film, right? And you think that you can just teach them that. Well, you have to have an excellent teacher, number one. You have to have a willing student, number two. And number three, you have to pray on a miracle, because there are a lot of players, I swear, we're still praying for them to learn how to play basketball. And there's this sort of myth, and another myth that I guess we should address, which is that every NBA player really understands basketball, like really knows how to play basketball. And it's just simply not true. It's just not true, right? There are all sorts of players in the NBA. And I assure you that if you talk to any, top end athlete or top end coach in private, maybe they don't want to be too controversial, they would tell you that maybe half their roster kind of doesn't really understand basketball. Not as well as they need to, certainly not as well as some of the top players playing overseas, certainly maybe not even as top as well as LeBron James instinctively understood the game when he was 16 or 17 years old. It's about angles, it's about passes, it's about reads and reacts, it's about knowing where to be, it's about knowing if this guy does this, I got to do this. Scotty Barnes gets it. Thaddeus Young gets it. Otto Porter gets it. Jakob Poeltl gets it. Fred VanVleet, despite his ego, he gets it. These guys are students of the game. They understand the game. The rest of this roster, hard to say. Hard to say. It's really hard to pin down. OG Anunoby, yeah, he gets it, right? But the rest of the guys, right? It seems like too often the Raptors have taken these sort of flyers on these like long, rangy athletes. Sean, thanks a lot, man. We were just talking about Pendants like half an hour ago on Instagram. Thanks a lot, man. Oh, CJ Miles, so funny. He's been having some back and forths with fans, and it's been funny. But it's definitely true. What I'm saying is true. I promise you it is true, and it's just not the case. There are a lot of guys in the NBA who are honestly big for nothing. Right, they're in the league because they're athletic, they can jump, and look, it's just really a battle between neuroscience and physics, right? You either think the game or you run the game, right? And look, we often overlook the thinking part because we think anyone can do it, right? And we often maybe overrate the running and jumping part because we think that no one can possibly teach Luka Doncic how to be in a basketball court, right? So I don't know why, like if I talk in normal life, I have no issue clearing my throat, but suddenly I get on a podcast and my throat is just like I got a frog in my throat. My bad, guys. So let's look at the historical examples. But before I get into the first example of this, I just want to say that all NBA athletes, like, they're good at basketball, but there are levels to this. There are levels to the cerebral nature of how quickly you pick up certain schemes, how quickly you can tell, like someone like Draymond Green, he knows the plays you're running before you're running them, right? If he's the opponent, he's scouted you that well. Draymond is an example of extreme cerebral assassin. It is a big reason why he, despite being 6'5", 6'6", not being necessarily a good scorer or a very good offensive player in general, apart from his passing, he's been able to make, possibly a Hall of Fame career out of very limited athletic upside. Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, there are so many examples of guys who are just better, way better at basketball than you would imagine. Kyle Anderson is a great example. Historical examples include guys like Boris Diaw, right? hella talented, very athletic, yes, but even when he's not that athletic, he still understands intuitively how to play basketball. So whether it is in free agency, whether it's the undrafted heap, whether it's the 13th overall pick, my big thing for the Raptors this year is you cannot prioritize wingspan. Like, yeah, you want it. It's a really good thing to have. But trust me, guy could have 7'2" wingspan and not know how to use it. There's so many examples. So someone saying Triple H. Ah, thanks a lot, man. That's a little WWE shout out there. If you're a wrestling fan, let me know your favorite wrestler. I'm very curious. Mine was definitely Sting. All right. Okay. So some of you may be way too young to remember this, right? But this was really like the first good Raptors team, right? And they made some very, I'll just call it questionable moves to get there. In fact, you know, you could make an argument against every single one of these trades and or signings. You really could. And it wasn't until these guys left, and they kind of left for the reverse, right? So sometimes you have a good thing and you kind of screw it up. So trading Marcus Camby, who was a second overall pick from UMass, for an older Charles Oakley was not really a move that made a hell of a lot of sense to a lot of people back then. But you know, you get this enforcer. You think you have the next Michael Jordan in Vince Carter, and so you go for it. You get the same guy who protected Jordan, and he kind of teaches Vince and Tracy how to be professionals. It was a really underrated move to get um, to get Charles Oakley. Then Doug Christie, you know, in an unheralded move in the summer of 1996, it was a trade deadline of 1996. You get Doug Christie for Herb Williams, and Doug Christie and Herb Williams for Willie Anderson and Victor Alexander. Honestly, like, Doug Christie was just such an underrated player, right? Whether it was with the Raptors or whether it was the Kings, this guy won everywhere he went because he did all the small things. Great defender, great passer. He was like a 6'7" point guard before that was really a thing. Wasn't really overly flashy, never really made an all-star team. So you don't really associate him with like greatness. But he was great. He was a great freaking player. And yeah, he was really underrated. Del Curry, you know, spacing, shooting, veteran leadership, you know, coming from the Hornets, right? And he signed with the Raptors, spurning the Bucks. And yeah, he added some serious veteran presence. Yeah, he was a little bit old. Yeah, he couldn't really defend, but it was a stabilizing presence, and he knew the game. He understood the game. There's a reason why both his sons are in the NBA. He coached them, right? And then Jonathan Bender, the fifth overall pick for an over-the-hill kind of, you know, middling role player in Antonio Davis, who would later on, of course, go on to become an all-star with the Raptors. Another, you know, very similar trade, this young, bouncy, you know, athletic guy. I mean, Jonathan Bender was, by most people's estimation at the draft, the next Kevin Garnett. Out of high school, you don't want to miss on this guy. Oh, my God. And he didn't really amount to that much. He was an interesting player to watch, very fun to watch, very fun for 2K, but didn't really translate to winning, didn't really see that role. So you look at guys like that, you look at a guy like Cliff Robinson or Robert Ory. God, there's so many examples of guys like this, and they're available, man. People underrate these guys. And this is an example of, you know, that first Raptors team that went up against the Knicks in the playoffs, got bounced in the first round, went back against the Knicks, got past them, got to the second round, and then even the year after, when they were missing Vince Carter and they shut down the season, who was it that, you know, that led that charge, right? It was Chris Childs. So the shot. Speaking of Chris Childs and experience and basketball IQ, he couldn't remember the shot clock and he couldn't remember the time and score. But, you know, it was really, I mean, you think about that team, who was on it? And I didn't even include Muggsy Bogues on that list of really smart players. Kevin Willis. There were so many good and smart veterans and smart players on that team. But that run that the Raptors went on, historic. Morris Peterson, Antonio Davis, not the two guys that you would expect to be able to lead you to a competitive series. But let me tell you something about that team, that Vince Carter-less, you know, Raptors team, coached by Lenny Wilkens. Morris Peterson and Antonio Davis led that team to as many playoff wins as Pascal Siakam has in the last 4 years. Okay, that's just straight fact. They pushed the Pistons to 5 games, and how did they do it? Just experience, man. Experience, know-how, knowledge. That's it. There were no superstars on that team. There were no stars on that team. I don't think you can call Antonio Davis or Morris Peterson a star. They were role players, and a team full of role players. Jerome Williams, my God, right? Like you would look at these guys and you would be like, maybe none of these guys could really play in the NBA today. Maybe Mo Pete would be like an eighth guy on a team, but certainly not the most talented roster. But they milked the hell out of that roster without Vince, right? How did they do it? Just knowing where to be, playing mistake-free basketball, understanding how to exploit gaps. It's really more chess than checkers, right? Moving on to the second iteration, one of my favorite teams. And I don't know if it's because I was just so into the Raptors at this time. I don't know if it's because I was excited about the Andrea Bargnani, drafting. I don't know. It's because Roko Ukic was on the team. But man, I have such favorable memories of this team. And I don't know why it is, but I just loved this iteration of the Raptors. TJ Ford, Jose Calderon, Anthony Parker. Honestly, one of my favorite all-time Raptors. Loved him at Maccabi Tel Aviv, and when we signed him, I remember my friend Ron, and he's from Israel, and we were like, I remember talking to him at the time, and I was just like, "Yo, I'm so freaking excited! We just got Anthony Parker." We also got Maceo Baston that year, I believe, from Maccabi Tel Aviv. We had so many smart players. Rasha Nesterovic, who could forget Rasha Nesterovic, right? From the Spurs system, right? And Jorge Garbajosa, the guy that, Brian Colangelo would use as a scapegoat because his season ended and the Raptors pretty much were never the same team again. But how is it that Jorge Garbajosa, a rookie at the time, first time in the NBA, really a veteran from overseas, how was he able to impact so much that he started the season out as a bench player and then moved himself up to a starting small forward? Like, how are you able to compensate? How is he athletically able as a big, really? I mean, honestly, you look at him, he's a power forward. How is he able to play small forward for this team? And they were winning. They won 47 games that year, if I remember correctly. And it was just such a turnaround season. And I made a mix about it. And I was just incredibly impressed with that entire roster. And it was just a lot of guys where, it's a little unheralded, right? Anthony Parker had a nice cup of tea with with the Sixers, playing behind Allen Iverson. God knows you're not going to get any touches or any minutes. Goes over to Europe, builds up his career, wins EuroLeague MVP, comes over, and he understood the game. Like, he was always smart. I remember watching him in college. He was smart, but he just refined his game in Europe. And so, he is a commodity, but you got him for so little. Go Google, if you're ever curious, go Google the contract that he signed. And then, of course, he hung on with the Cleveland Cavaliers afterwards. And of course, Anthony Parker is now known as Candace Parker's big brother, because that's what happens when you have a sibling who's younger than you. That's just better than you at basketball. But yeah, it was a really interesting team to root for, and they played together. They really played together. I mean, sure, there was a really rough start to start the year, as TJ Ford and Chris Bosh were trying to figure it out with the rest of their teammates. But by the end of it, man, that was a very fun and exciting team to watch. And they got bounced in the first round of the playoffs, and unfortunately, things would never be quite the same. But I think that team was, in fact, built through this philosophy of smart, not high, or smart, not jump, smart, not wingspan. I don't know. Slide number 3. The We the North era, right? I mean, the most unheralded trade at the time, thinking, I still remember when the Raptors traded for Rudy Gay. And what a day that was, where Brian Colangelo thought, I finally got the guy I should have picked at number 1. And then, of course, not realizing that one guy and his hatred for box scores, effectively, would result, not directly, but sort of indirectly, in Brian Colangelo basically being fired. And the optimism for Rudy Gay when he came, everyone playing that clip over and over again of Rudy Gay with the Memphis Grizzlies at the time, killing the Raptors on a game winner. And everyone saying, oh no, not this guy, not this guy. Oh no, not this guy. Some of those box scores, I'm glad he threw them out, man, because they are burned and tattooed on my brain. Like, it was an abysmal thing. And it was all dumb shit, right? And it's ironic because Rudy Gay went on to become a much better player afterwards. like a much better player, very serviceable role player after some injuries, an older guy. He's kind of fits into the mold of a smarter basketball player now. But back then, no, right? And you had this very ball dominant player who was kind of holding Kyle and DeMar back, but then you also had like a lack of depth. And you solve it all with this one trade for Gravis Vasquez, Chuck Hayes, John Salmons, the guy who God told not to sign with the Raptors the first time, but then he came back via a trade, and Patrick Patterson, you know, and it was a move initiated to kick off a tank, and it backfires, and the Raptors win because people fundamentally they don't understand where wins come from. I guarantee you, look at the analytics on those guys; they'll tell you where wins come from, and it's all the small things, right? You got get a guy who boxes out like Chuck Hayes. You get a guy who can initiate the offense and kind of play off the ball, on the ball, has some big playmaker potential in Gravis Vasquez. You get a versatile, do it all type of two-way forward in John Salmons. He can do everything. Some people used to call him like a YMCA LeBron. He was just a smart player. He's just a really smart player. Chuck Hayes, boxing out and whatever. Patrick Patterson can stretch the floor. The initial sort of stretch big model, the 3-and-D big, like a Danielle Marshall, right? And it's just such a great package of players now thinking about it in hindsight, and how much those guys really kicked off sort of a winning culture in Toronto. Ironically, because they were coming from such a losing culture in Sacramento at the time, but they brought a winning philosophy with them, because winners and people who play basketball the right way, they don't really stop playing basketball the right way. It's very rare to find a player like a Tim Duncan who's just been so well coached to just turn him into something that he's not. And he's kind of been that way, right? He intuitively understands the game. He understands angles. He understands, patterns, and that pattern recognition element, the cerebral element of basketball, cannot be understated. Moving on, the fourth one, of course, right? Who could forget this team? The team that finally clicked together, the We the North era, and unfortunately some members of the We the North initial era had to be moved on, but you get a championship. Most underrated player in this entire equation, in my opinion, Danny Green. Unheralded hero, the Green Ranger. So good. You look at his analytics chart off the freaking page. Off the page. He was so good until he wasn't. But he was so great. And there's a reason why he is one of very few players in NBA history who has won a championship as a starter on 3 different teams. It's a bit of the Robert Horry effect, and they actually have a ton in common, from being big, big wingy type guys who are multi-positional defenders who can shoot threes. And Danny Green is this era's Robert Horry. I know that might be a hot take for some people, but he's a two-way guy, and I love it, and maybe he'll appreciate that if he ever hears about it. But Danny Green, Marc Gasol, I mean, it's not like you were getting rid of dummies, to get these guys, but these guys were on the next level, right? Jonas Valanciunas is not a stupid player by any means, not a low IQ player, but he's not Marc Gasol, and he's not Pau Gasol. Pau Gasol, once rumored to be the fastest player to ever learn the triangle of any player that Phil Jackson had ever coached. Just truly brilliant minds. Like, we're talking future coaches club of the year, right? And so you get these guys together and they can bounce ideas. And to be honest, when your team gets this smart, even the dummies have to adjust, because nobody wants to be the odd person out, right? So I think that Marc Gasol trade, Kawhi Leonard, also a very smart player. I think he really intuitively understands angles and how to attack them and knowing where to be. And a lot of this comes from early coaching, in my opinion. It comes from early coaching, film study. Who coached you in AAU? Did they let you, go coast with bad habits? Too often, I find some of the players with the lowest IQ and probably like the lowest passion for doing things the right way end up being some of those like highly recruited McDonald's All-American types, right? They never really had to learn to play the right way. They never really had to learn to play off of anybody because they were always the man. And so their entire role has always been just dribble out the clock and take a shot. And that's not really basketball, right? That's not really how you play basketball. In fact, one of the best things about Scotty Barnes was that he played with other good players at every single step. I think the most untalented team he's ever been on was probably FSU, because Bird was stacked. Prior to Bird, he was with Vernon Carey, who's one of the top players in the country. He's always had to learn how to play off of other people, and that is always going to come back and help him, right? Because you're not always going to be the man. Even when you are the man, you're not always going to be the man. You know what I mean? So like on a particular play, like that might not be your run, that might not be your set. Like you're gonna have to play off of somebody, and if you never learned how to set a screen, because you never had to, like who the hell were you running who you think LeBron is setting screens for at St. Vincent St. Mary's, right? I mean he did because he's a smart player, but like he didn't have to, right? No one was gonna bench him, be like, oh you didn't set a screen. We know that you're the first high school player that's on ESPN right now, but you know what I mean? So it comes down to the coaches to hold these players accountable to play the right way. A lot of guys pick up the good habits and the best habits from international play, right? When you play with Team USA, you're usually coached by a bench of some of the best coaches in the league, right? Some of the best coaches in the world. If you played for Nigeria, you were coached by Mike Brown and Jordi Fernandez, right? What an honor, right? To get those two coaches, right? So it helps, having new perspectives on the game, having new systems to run, not just being stuck running the same sort of, bad system over and over for 3-4 years. And it's something that you got to wonder with some of these younger players like a Jalen Green, Cade Cunningham, etc. is, are you drastically stunting whatever they could be by putting them in these kind of dog shit systems that are run around them, especially if their eventual role is going to be as a secondary or third guy. Finally, the fifth one. I think the move towards intelligence, or the reinitiation of the move towards intelligence, really started before Scotty. It started with the undrafted, signing of Fred VanVleet, the drafting of OG Anunoby. I think intuitively on the defensive end, that guy's a wizard, right? It's into some unheralded, somewhat, I wouldn't call it, less acclaimed moves as well. Jeff Doughton, he's a really smart player. Thaddeus Young, the trade for Thaddeus Young, granted he may not stick around for very long, but he's also a very smart player. He really understands the game, right? So I think one of the things that's sort of been missing this year was the teaching element, right? You have to have buy-in, you have to have trust to learn from people. But I think whatever the Raptors do with the 13th overall pick this year, I was obviously a very big advocate and remain a big advocate for a guy like Jordan Hawkins, just because I know that he's super well coached. He's coming from a good system. This is why a lot of people really prioritize these blue bloods, because they know that they've been coached well. If you have a guy who's coming from the Memphis system, under Penny Hardaway, or coming from Vanderbilt under Jerry Stackhouse, or just coming from a system where they spent a year with a coach that you respect, know, understand, whether it be, Delano Banton being in Nebraska under Fred Hoiberg, right? That's another example, right? So who are the culprits on this team? Really, I mean, it's hard to just pick on him, but Chris Boucher just really comes to mind always when it comes to basketball IQ. Right now, everyone doesn't have to be Boris Diaw or Steve Nash, but I think that that's one player that always stuck out to me. Precious Achiuwa, as much as I've come around on both of these guys, and they can help you tremendously. There's a cost to them helping you, which is they don't always know where to be, and that's very difficult. And if you have a system that is running on read and react, and it's kind of like a motion offense where one thing triggers another thing, triggers another thing, triggers another thing, you need everyone to be on point. Everyone needs to be on point. There is a reason why the Sacramento Kings system works. Kevin Huerter, Domantas Sabonis, they De'Aaron Fox, they have some really smart players on that team. Keegan Murray, really smart player. Harrison Barnes, really smart player. You need smart players to do this. And so, luckily for the Raptors, smart is a bit of a, call it, undervalued commodity in the NBA and in life. Don't accurately know how to measure IQ in basketball, but it's a bit of a cop-out to say when you know it, when you see it, you know it. When you see it, you know it. There are a lot of players over in the EuroLeague that I think the Raptors should probably look at, especially if they're capped out and they don't have a ton of money. There may be some guys that you could plug into those I don't know, Chris Boucher minutes, where it's like a stretch big who just instinctively just gets the game. He understands the game. He's been around the block a few times. Maybe he's 26, 27 years old. Take a page out of the old book. The Jose Calderones, the Rashon Esteroviches, the Anthony Parkers, and the Jorge Garbajosas of... did I say Jorge Garbajosa? Yeah, the Jose Calderon, Jorge Garbajosas of the world. Those guys make a difference. They're not flashy, and because they're not flashy, it's precisely why they're underrated. I think Jakob Poeltl is a really good step in the right direction. I think if you want to poach some more guys from the Spurs system, if they intend to tank again next year, although I don't see how the hell they can justify tanking if they get Victor Wembanyama, but there may be some guys who are available in the free agency market, in Europe, in the draft, in the undrafted heap. 4-year guys. That's who you should be looking at. 4-year guys who've spent some time in college. Look at the immediate impact of a Herb Jones in New Orleans. And he's a very smart player. You can tell. Offense, defense, doesn't matter. Dyson Daniels in New Orleans. Another guy from New Orleans. Trey Murphy, another guy from New Orleans. 3 really smart players. I know that they did not have a great season. I understand that. All the stuff with Zion, injuries, West is kind of, very flat in the middle. It's very smart players. Look at the OKC Thunder, right? Josh Giddey, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams. How is this working? How is it working? Smart players. They know how to play off each other. J-Dub, J-Will, both really smart players. Really, really smart players. You watch them play. In college, you'd see that. So, who do you guys think that we should target? And does anyone want to call in? Y'all could feel free to call in. We have time for one call if you want. Interesting name. I mean, you don't need a lot. Hawkins won't be around by the 13th pick. Sure, he will. I mean, I have no idea if he will be because I'm not a clairvoyant, but he could be. John Salmon sucked. John Salmon's for the Raptors. I think he was a serviceable, player for what you were paying him. I think he was also very serviceable for the role that he had, right? You need role players, right? Everyone can't be an ascending star. Everyone can't be an ascending starter. You need guys who just buy into their roles, right? So much of the Spurs' success over the years, look at the players who've come through the Spurs system, whether it be, aging stars at the very tail end of their career, like a Pau Gasol, whether it be, seasoned, and call it like veterans who just instinctively, they really do have a knack for like basketball IQ, whether it be undrafted guys or even like late round picks. Like Danny Green was an undrafted guy, believe it or not. 6'7" with a 7-foot wingspan. How the hell do you go undrafted? Late bloomer, right? People just didn't understand the shooting potential and the defense potential of that guy, right? You look at every great team. There's some really I've never seen a champion win with multiple dummies. Dummies don't usually end up on NBA champions. That's very rare. So, yeah. No, for sure. I think the addition by subtraction element is for sure true. Well, yes. But they did develop a lot of players, right? Consider the assets that have gone out. Consider the players. Like you say, they haven't been good, and I get that, right? They haven't been good. But consider the assets that have gone out and what those assets are now doing. You have Derek White playing a major role on a playoff contender. You have Jakob Poeltl, who is the starting center for the Toronto Raptors. You have DeMar DeRozan, who just eliminated him as the leading scorer or number one option for the Bulls. You have DeJounte Murray, who actually made the playoffs. These are all Spurs guys. All of them were on the same team just like a year ago. Now, you're telling me if they'd kept all these guys with Keldon Johnson and Devin Vassell and Jeremy Sohan. You're telling me they couldn't have fielded a competitive roster? Of course they could have. They chose to blow it up. That's their prerogative. They wanted to bottom out. They didn't want to be in the middle. Kudos to them. By the way, they got multiple firsts or first for every single one of those players. So smart. Wait, what did they get for DeMar DeRozan? Did they get anything for DeMar DeRozan? I'm curious. Oh, they got Thaddeus Young, and then they got Thaddeus Young in picks, I believe. Hey, I mean, he's given them a lot of picks, and I mean, they're good at drafting. R.C. Buford is great at drafting, so yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, I said I want movement shooters, but really at the end of the day, like I want players who just understand what their role is on offense. They're like movable pieces. Like I talked about chess yesterday, like having different pieces that work in tandem, work in unison together. So, yeah. Anyways, the playoffs are starting in 5 minutes. I deliberately put this live before the playoffs. I didn't want to compete with the NBA playoffs, but yeah, I mean, it's been very interesting to see what happened yesterday. The Phoenix Suns winning. I got to tell you, like, a lot of people had them out. A lot of people were like, oh, this team's done. It's the nature of being down 0-2. It's the nature of being down 0-2. But I really do think it's going to be the Boston Celtics in the finals. I think they have a lot of bad habits, to be honest, but they just have so many smart players. Al Horford. Also, what do you guys think of Coach Budenholzer? Being the Raptors' next coach. I've been looking into him a little bit more. I've kind of always known him as a as a guy who underperformed or overperformed in the regular season, sort of underperformed in the playoffs. Then he wins a ring with Giannis, and of course, we can talk about that. But I was looking back at some of those Hawks teams that he had because he won't have a Giannis if he comes here, right? And I was just looking at like some of the things he does well. And granted, he had a great 3-point shooter now, in Kyle Korver, and that does solve a lot of problems in terms of shooting. But that team was very pass friendly. Like a lot of passing, a lot of motion, a lot of movement, not a lot of player movement, a lot of ball movement. Very interesting. A reasonably efficient offense, and they were the number 1 seed. So, I hate Bud. Why? I mean, he's not a bad coach. He's a really good coach. I mean, there's a reason why he's been very successful. He's been like, he's just got a face, doesn't he? He's just got that kind of face, that sort of, the recessed chin, kind of feel like he's a bit of a weak man type of thing, right? But I really think, like, I feel really badly for the guy, right? I mean, his brother dies in a car accident. He gets fired for, making a mistake in the playoffs. This is 2 years after winning a championship, man. How many times has this guy led a team to number 1 or number 2 in the East? Go back and really count it. That has to be worth something, man. It has to be worth something. At some point, your players have to execute as well. I'm not saying he's a perfect coach. I'm not saying he's Steve Kerr, Phil Jackson, or, Greg Popovich, or anybody. I am, however, saying that, he is a modestly above average coach. I would still prefer, Jordy Fernandez, because partially it's because of the Denver connection with Mike Malone and my personal belief that this team would be very effective if run a little bit more like Scotty as the Jokic role. I think we have a lot of the pieces to play that way. Jordy Fernandez, Adventures with Smiles. Why do you think that? I mean, naturally, I think anyone who takes this job is going to have a conversation with Masai and Bobby beforehand about what they're trying to build here, right? And I don't know how that conversation does not include we're building around Scotty long term, so figure it out. Figure out your relationship with this guy, right? One of the most underrated parts of coaching is relationships. You need a player who really understands that. You need a player who's had a track record for having excellent relationships with their players, not just one player or 2 players, but all their players. Mike Malone spent an entire summer in Serbia, or I don't know if it was an entire summer, but he spent some weeks and months in Serbia getting to know Nikola Jokic, understanding Jokic, partying with Jokic, Serbian parties are fun as hell. I say this as a Serb. Um, Understanding that culture allowed him to understand Nikola Jokic. I think Nikola Jokic, seeing that sort of investment of time, so maybe whoever our next coach is needs to go and tour the streets of West Palm Beach with Scotty Barnes, and maybe, I don't know, take a flight to Cameroon and discover the trails of Pascal Siakam and Christian Koloko, and then, I don't know, go and, I don't know, go to Rockford, Illinois, and go meet Fred VanVleet's entire family. I have no idea, but I think it would be good to find a coach with this intuitive understanding of connection building, because it's so important. It's so important. I was listening to Becky Hammond talking about the Popovich effect, and one of the things that Greg Popovich used to do is he used to have these like really long wine and dinner type of engagements with people. That's sort of lost, right? In today's, everything Instagram world, right? Social media is so ruining young athletes and they don't even know it. It's not just a John Morant thing, right? But the value of building proper relationships face to face, really, sometimes you just have old school people who understand this mentality. And I feel weird saying this because I'm 35 and I'm a millennial, but I was raised right, and I definitely understand the value of, personal time, taking the time to really, sit and have a real deep discussion with somebody for an hour or 2 hours and figuring out who the hell they are, because you can't coach people if you don't understand them. And I would like a coach who has a proven track record and a desire to do that. Sometimes you meet people and they used to do that, but they don't have the time anymore. Maybe they're in a different place in their life. Maybe they're kind of burned out. I wonder if Coach Bud is burned out, which is why personally I would like Jody Fernandez or Becky Hammond. But if not those two guys, Coach Bud's still a great coach. Um, Not after he just threw Coach Bud under the bus, man. You mean the next coach of the Raptors is me? Fred VanVleet is loving it. Also, shout outs to Gary Trent Sr. for sharing our reel on Instagram. Really appreciate that. Um, yeah. All right. I mean, he won his championship, right? And I wonder, um, would they take Pascal Siakam in a sign and trade? Like, that would be a pretty decent sign and trade value, given that he could just walk for nothing. He seems like the type of guy who would do you a favor on the way out. That would be kind of crazy, wouldn't it? I don't know. Um, I gotta tell you, I played NBA 2K out like a long time ago, and I played out Giannis's entire career. Well, I didn't play out his entire career. I basically played out Scotty's entire career. This was 2 years ago. Ironically, prior to Scotty being drafted. So drafted Scotty to the Raptors, played out the entire career, played him out as a point guard, obviously. And in 2029, I signed Giannis to be my starting center. And he was great. He was bulkier. I spent some VC on getting him, the 4% stronger, and getting him in the weight room and just making him a big dude. And I basically had Giannis. He couldn't play that many minutes because he was older, right? He still couldn't shoot, but man, he was like killing it on the boards. And so I had this incredible team. And somehow I managed to get Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. So I had Scotty and Shea at point and four, at point and two, and then I had OG at three. I can't remember who I had at four, and I had Giannis at five. Who was four? I think it was Evan Mobley. Yeah, this is when I had traded Pascal Siakam for the second overall pick, or the first overall pick, and picked Evan Mobley in the 2021 draft. So I built up this really long athletic team, which, honestly is much bigger than Vision 6'9", which I thought was kind of funny. Um, yeah, I never played coach mode. That's cool. Oh man, I hope that works. Did how many championships y'all win? Probably like 3 or 4, eh? Um, I don't know why I'm gonna do free promo for NBA 2K, but y'all know that NBA 2K23 for PS4 and PS5 is 19.99 at Best Buy right now. Not bad. If you ended up not picking up the game and you have an entire summer to play the game, right, while the playoffs are happening, it's 19.99. It's not bad. I'm just saying. Um, yeah, bro. I mean, if he could solve the problems of an NBA team, he would be a top five pick. It's just like defenses can't gear up for him, right? Like if you're look, if you're a team with the third overall pick and you decide to go off the board and pick Casey Wallace to save your franchise, you're probably going to be screwed. But if you draft him to be like the best fourth starter in the NBA someday, I think he'll probably overperform that expectation, man. Oh, for real? Like you didn't get 22 with Scotty? Man, that's cool. I don't know. Like I used to be a really big 2K fan, but like right now I'm just like, all right. And it's kind of funny because I was at Best Buy the other day picking up hard drives, and I was like, should I not? Should I not? And then I decided I'm like, I'm gonna gift this to myself as a gift when we're done Pendants next weekend. I'm just gonna gift it to myself, 19.99. Spoil myself. Some people take trips. Some people take, buy a yacht. Some people buy 1999 NBA 2K. So I'm gonna enjoy that. Anyway, y'all enjoy the playoffs today. I'm out, and hopefully the Raptors get some smarter players. Thanks a lot for the chats and everything. Thank you so much, man. Um, I still have the PS4. I mean, I also have, by the way, I also have like all the old gaming systems. So I have NBA, sorry, not NBA. I have N64, which I don't know if I've ever shared this, but I picked it up for $5 from a dude with a fat farm box in EB Games. He was trying to sell these games to EB Games, and they weren't giving him much because he didn't have the boxes, and they offered him $3 for the controller. So he was just like, take all of it. And the clerk behind the shop was going to be slick about it, so he's probably going to pocket the rest of it. And I was just like, I'll give you five for the whole thing. So I ended up getting GoldenEye and Revenge. So I have I have PS1, PS2, PS3, PS4. I don't know why I have all four, but I do. Um, I have Xbox 360, and PS4, GameCube, and Dreamcast. I think that's all my systems. Yeah, I have all of them. Live stream of me playing 2K23. It's not going to be fun. I run a lot of plays. I think I'm all right. I think I'm good. I don't know. I would love to play Scotty one day. I think that would be like, but it's funny. Scotty didn't used to like 2K. I remember a video of him once, and he was like 2K's trash, and now he plays 2K all the time. I thought it was hilarious. Um, Kobe Bryant's basketball friends. Yeah, I mean, you know what? Like sometimes you play these games back then, and now you have standards. So you go back, and it's like, ooh, some of these games do not hold up. I used to be obsessed with NBA 2K and 2K1. I got 2K1 on bootleg from my buddy. Because Dreamcast you could bootleg really easy. Probably a big reason why that system went out of business. Um, but yeah, 2K1 was fun as hell, man. It's fucking revolutionary when you think about where graphics were, like the jump, like to 2K1. I used to play with the Portland Trailblazers. I scored like a million points with Brian Grant and Rasheed Wallace. I don't know why I always played with that team. I always struggled to make shots with Vince for some reason with the Raptors. And yeah, it was kind of funny because like even before people knew who Pedro was, like I think in 2K or 2K1, he was like a 64 or 65 rated player. And one day I was playing with the Kings, and I had an injury in the first half to like the starting small forward, whoever that was. I think it was Corliss Williamson. And I put Pedro in. I scored like 39 points with him. He was a 65 rated player. I just kept shooting and making shots with him. It was crazy. So, yo, you're really dating yourself here. That's crazy. Anyway, y'all, I'm out. for the last time. Thanks a lot for the stream. Just a heads up, Penance tickets are on sale. Link in the bio. I'm going to be there. Hopefully see you there. Some community members are coming. I would really appreciate it. It'd be nice to meet some of you for the first time. Some awesome films coming up. I'm going to play the trailer to exit the stream. If you have already watched it yesterday, by all means, feel free to vamonos. All right. Where is it? Where is it? There we go. All right. Peace, guys.
Do you feel safe out here riding your bike on these streets alone?
This is a fucking BMX bike, so I'm not afraid.
Would you let me go? No, you never come back. I'ma be the best that you never had. I'ma kick back when you fake like that. Head out of the game, I don't take that back. Would you let me go? No, you never